Okay, so I am very pleased to welcome Lisa Williams to the podcast today. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm good today, Johnny. Thank you for the invitation.
Excellent stuff. So, we've got some really interesting topics to talk about in relation to services procurement, its place within total workforce management, and just the broader total workforce management topic as a whole, which I know you are a very strong advocate for and do some great talks and produce some great content in this area. You're the senior director of operations, talent strategy, and employee experience at Dow Chemicals. And you've had a really interesting journey through that business. I was looking back through your LinkedIn history earlier. Um, you've got, it's really interesting how you've gone through that process. To get us
Mhm.
started, would you be able to just talk us through that kind of bit about your background? I know you
Sure.
studied mechanical engineering originally. Just talk us a little bit about through that and how that journey progressed at Dow.
Sure. And again, thank you for having me. Yes, I have a bachelor's of science in mechanical engineering from Prairie View A&M University here in Texas, in the United States, as well as a master's in manufacturing management from Penn State University, which 25 plus years ago was the beginning of supply chain. It became supply chain, right?
Right.
So through that time in Dow, I was very fortunate to start my career in engineering and design construction as a mechanical design engineering lead, again, designing equipment for our facilities and then ultimately working with the procurement organization to get that equipment delivered and erected into the field. So a real engineering and design and construction experience. But then I really wanted to lean into my master's degree and moved into supply chain and spent quite a bit of time there in planning and scheduling and ultimately the expertise center. And I had the opportunity to support an ERP uplift in Dow. So I worked a little bit in our IT organization for supply chain as well. But the journey continued. And I wanted to get yet another functional experience under my belt. And so I moved into procurement, which ended up being a full circle moment. I was able to be a category leader twice in procurement. First, in process containment equipment, which was a tip of the hat back to my engineering design days. So I was actually the category leader for a type of equipment I once designed it as an engineer. Those were interesting conversations with the suppliers, let me tell you. I
Wow.
gained a lot of immediate respect in those at those tables. And then I was able to be a category leader for bulk marine in logistics, which was a tip of the hat to the supply chain experience I had. So I was very, very fortunate, again, being at the negotiation table with suppliers on bulk marine equipment contracts and being a supply chain professional, very unique perspective that was in Dow's advantage. So after doing that for a while, I really wanted something new and different. And the company decided that we needed to develop a contract labor strategy. So I was put on, asked to lead actually a corporate program to develop Dow's first ever contract labor strategy. And it's a big undertaking,
Yeah.
cross functional, enterprise wide. And after doing that for 2 or 3 years, through that journey, I really learned the importance of total workforce management and total workforce strategy. And as that opportunity sunset, it transitioned into a role back into my home function, as I love to refer to M&E operations because I will always be an engineer at my core, to come and lead talent strategy for manufacturing engineering operations, which after being gone away from the function for, I don't know, 15 plus years, it was an honor and a privilege to be trusted to come back and do this for the function.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Like you say, some real kind of circular moments there throughout that journey. Um, I think the thing that I find, or that strikes me from this, is you have a real understanding of the business. It's like you've got a total perspective of the business. You understand it from the very fundamentals of what the business is doing in terms of the product and services that they're providing, that technical, actual delivery aspect. And then you've obviously got that supply chain experience, the procurement experience on both the direct and indirect side. So dealing with, I always like to look at it as kind of dealing with buying things and also dealing with buying people and services. You've got that kind of total perspective across all of that. So the fact that you are now such a a thoughtful speaker when it comes to that total workforce conversation is a tribute to the fact that you have a really good understanding of the business. And I always look at it like this, it's a strategic imperative to make the best use of the organizational resources. But with your understanding of the business, you're going to see that pretty clearly.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that, Johnny, and I really do feel that. I feel my last two roles in Dow have been culminations of 20 plus now 28 years of experience in this company in a lot of different places. And Dow is a big company, right? Dow is a chemical manufacturing Fortune 100 legacy leader in material science and chemical manufacturing, deeply diversified, innovation focused, globally integrated. We're talking about over 35,000 employees. And at the height of the chemical industry cycle, it could be almost that many contractors on site trying to get the work done. We've won 10 Edison Awards, 63 R&D 100 awards, American Chemistry Council Sustainable Leadership Awards. And we've just this year, our manufacturing and production organization was recognized as #1 in Great Places to Work. And Dow has been on Great Places to Work for the last 5 years. So I run that resume about my company. And one more I'll throw in: 2025 CIO 100 Award for Excellence in IT. Why is all that important? Because it describes who we are. Right. In our DNA and how we show up in the marketplace for our customers, for our community, for our employees. And this DNA is critical to the transformation Dow and many other companies like Dow are going through now and will go into in 2026, which really sets us up for the conversation we're going to have today. So I thank you for allowing me to do that, but I really want your audience to understand the size of Dow and the size of the enterprise and the investment we're talking about, because I'm also going to talk about some things that we've done that have worked really well for us, even at our size.
Yeah, no, it's the context is absolutely everything to this. And it's, I think, like you say, that the awards, the recognition, the way that Dow operates as a company, what's in the company DNA effectively, and what very much comes across to me when I talk to you about this sort of stuff is it's all about doing things properly. It's all about, aligning strategically and doing things properly. And I'm a passionate believer in that as well. I'm in the Let's Get Stuff Done club. So I always find it very inspiring to talk to you about this sort of stuff. With total workforce management, I think it's one of those areas that I feel like it's kind of been around for a while, and it tends to sometimes overwhelm people and confuse people. But I feel like talking to people like you, seeing the stuff that you're doing, and some other people in the market that I'm engaging with and hearing from as well. I was chatting to a guy in Singapore who was most recently at Netflix, looking at some stuff around total work. It's really interesting to see this message starting to come out from some real leaders in this area, like yourself, where it's actually taking a serious approach to, no, we're actually going to do this. This is going to be a full workforce optimization. So just before we get into kind of demystifying the total workforce management space a little bit, going back to what you were saying about putting that contract labor program in place, wow, that must have been pretty special. So the bearing in mind it was like a generation one, and the size of how much you guys flex up at the peak cycle, that must have been an amazing piece of work to be involved with.
It was tremendous. I remember when the opportunity was posted in Dow, because we had to apply to lead the team and be on the team. I remember thinking, this is a great way for me to bring all of what I know and my best self and contributions to Dow at a time when it needs it, mostly because of that cross-functional experience. And the challenge and the size of the opportunity, right? I knew that it would take a special kind of leader to not only envision the future and map the pathway toward a solution, but lead a team of other leaders in crafting that plan, that strategic plan, and learning how to read and lead and influence the organization through the change. And when I say the organization, I mean the executive levels to the shop floor. That is a lot to ask of a person and a team. And there were some days where this was by far the hardest job I've ever had to do in Dow and the most rewarding to date, because there were times at 8:30 a.m. I'm meeting with my team, and we have literally a blank slate in front of us and a host of problems we're trying to solve. And no one can really help us because we were the team put in place to come up with the answers. And if you don't know how to recognize you are in a moment like that and the critical importance to keep moving and not get frozen in the fear of the gargantuan of what you've been asked to do, you can easily become overwhelmed. So the best personal lesson I learned is that the new world of work requires enterprises to make these kinds of enterprise-wide changes. We can't be afraid of them anymore. And you must find the right people in your organization who have both the skill and experience, the courage, and the stamina, and the influence and respect to go and make these things real and accomplishable. And I just think our team was very fortunate to find the right people to be able to do that. And we had tremendous support from our executive leadership, which is critical in any change. We had advocacy at our executive leadership to go and create this enterprise-wide contract labor strategy.
Yeah, it's amazing. It feels like it almost feels like a sort of a startup within an enterprise. So it's like you had to be like entrepreneurial, because I completely resonate with what you're talking about, where it's like you, the team, the problem, and no one's going to do it for you. I kind of that really resonates with me from an entrepreneurial point of view. But added to that pressure, you've got this whole enterprise sitting around you that are going, well, you got to convince me, and we're waiting for you to get on with this. So that the elements around communication and influence just cannot be underestimated with regards to this. I think it just comes through in what you're talking about. If you can't do that, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. I joke with people now. This was probably the first job in Dow in the senior years of my career where I literally would have butterflies in my stomach at 9 o'clock in the morning. And that can be a good thing and maybe a not so good thing. And for about 9 months, I had butterflies in my stomach. And when we got to a certain milestone where we felt like we've got a really good strategy and a good plan here, and we've got enough stakeholder alignment and advocacy to keep going, right? We may not have all of it, but we've got enough to keep going. Then the butterflies started to ease. But I also think what a wonderful blessing and opportunity to be this late in your career and be given an opportunity where you can still have butterflies in your stomach and relearn yourself and say, I can still be innovative. I can still be influential. I can still be collaborative. I can still lead and inspire people to a tangible result. So it was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, and I think for people like yourself, and certainly I agree with this as well. It's all about the challenge, and that certainly sounds like a monumental challenge. I think the interesting thing about it, the way you talk about like having butterflies in your stomach and things like that, if you were advising somebody else who was coming into that position right now at another company, you just think of the words of wisdom you could give to them, and think of the reassurance you could give to them of like, this is going to seem like you're climbing Mount Everest, but you're going to get there. It's doable. I think that's so important. And I mean, the contract labor program, the contingent labor programs now that's becoming more mature. But with what you're doing, for example, around total workforce management, that's why it's so important to be having these types of conversations. Same with services procurement transformation. Mm-hmm. A lot of organizations, people would sit there and just think, I don't know how to get started. I don't know if this is even possible. We're getting to the point now where there's more and more people coming out. around areas like services procurement when they carried out a transformation. I had a really interesting conversation yesterday with David Orm, who was in procurement at Cox Communications. You know, 1.6 billion a year spend program. Only about 120 million of it was contingent workforce. The rest was all services procurement.
Wow.
So
Yes.
been through that process and seen it, but people need to hear that. And I think particularly when you get to, I would regard total workforce management as the absolute most complex state of that kind of work, because it's bringing everything together, and you have to have nailed every channel, as we'll discuss. You know, there are people who don't even know how to think about this, who don't even know how to organize it in their brain. So I think as people go through the process, as this maturity comes out into the market, it's so useful for other people who are at the start of their journey to listen to the experiences of people like yourself and hear this stuff, even if just to say, do you know what, I'm not going to just die in a ditch here. This is something that we can achieve.
Right. So, and Johnny, that's why I am so appreciative when I'm invited to podcasts like yours, because not even a year, 6 months into our engagement, and this was early 2022, I quickly realized there was no recipe in the marketplace for what we needed to accomplish. And as soon as I started to figure it out, by the end of 2022, I started to speak about it. As soon as I figured it out, and I started to speak about the lack of guidance, direction, and structure for organizations who wanted to develop total contract labor strategies, not just for their contingent workforce, but for most of us, the bulk of our contract labor investment is in statement of work. And because we didn't have the technology for so many years until now, attempting to tackle that beast of statement of work was just unimaginable. But now, even in the last 2 years, we have technology and better understanding of technology and adoption of artificial intelligence into every core of our business processes and task execution that are now making this SOW monster a lot less intimidating and the requirement of business that we must solve for right now. So I appreciate this, because this is not Dow trade secret. This is a problem our industry has to solve collectively, because we all need the uplift of getting better control over our services procurement, because it is going to be a critical enabler of all of our business strategies going forward.
I couldn't agree more. And I literally had a conversation earlier today talking about a large US organization that their total labor program, or their workforce program, was like, and it was under an MSP, and it was just over $1 billion, and only 80 million of that a year was actually contractors, contingent workers. So the SOW portion of it for so long for people has felt like an unsolvable problem, or the kind of just leave it in the too difficult to do box. You know, we've been doing it that way for years, but now with AI and the way that technology has developed, I mean, what AI has enabled technology providers to do, and I speak from our own experience of solving this services procurement problem, AI has just massively enabled technology providers to be able to create a better user experience, to make things more efficient, to shortcut stuff. We were chatting earlier about this in terms of, you know, doing research that might take 40 hours in 5 minutes, because and enabling you. So I think that the changes in the market and the way that what AI has done, it's not only uplifted what the technology providers can do, but it's also, to a certain extent, taken away the excuse that some people in some organizations might have had, where they just would have said, it's too difficult. And that's just not valid anymore, is it?
It is absolutely not value. It's not valid anymore. We put SOW solutioning in the latter part of our multi-generational plan back in 2021 and in 2022. However, we are now here in the latter part of the original multi-generational plan for contract labor strategy. And we are realizing and accepting, and I'm so happy, that's why I'm smiling, that this is now possible to address. And we still have to address it in pieces, but this scope of work is now possible to address. And even more importantly, we don't have a choice. We have to find a way to address it to stay competitive.
That is the crux of everything, in my opinion. You've just nailed it. It's staying competitive, and it's how's the business going to operate effectively in the market if it can't control this part of how they do the work? This massive spend. It's crazy and totally irresponsible, in my opinion, for organizations if they're not trying to address it. But everyone's going to have to start addressing it. I got asked a really interesting question recently. Somebody said to me, what do you see within smaller companies? Like, say, I don't know, 1,000 people that are rapidly growing. What do they do around services procurement? Are they addressing it straight away? And it's interesting because we typically deal with larger organizations in terms of the customers of Zivio, but we do deal with some smaller organizations, and we deal with some kind of like fast moving businesses. And they're on this stuff straight away because it's like anything. They're just adopting the most effective way to do things. And they know they have to do work very, very flexibly. And they expect everything to be systemized. The real challenge is for the bigger established companies that have been around for years and years and years and built up this huge legacy of a giant services supply chain and a kind of manual or semi-manual way of getting things done that's entrenched in the operation and the culture of the organization, and trying to change that. But if they don't, then someone's going to be snapping at their heels and someone's going to, overtake them. So the competitive side of it, the ability to stay competitive and get things done, I think you just nailed it with that.
Absolutely.
So going back to the total workforce management side of things, I've always found it, if you're at a conference, at a workforce conference, and, there's maybe people in the not so good sessions talking about total workforce management. It just seems like people are coming out with the same kind of like platitudes and top level theoretical things. Can you just break it down in terms of, in your view, how would you really break down your approach to thinking about total workforce management in a way that you're doing this, you're making it happen. It's not just something you're just theorizing about. How would you break it down to people?
I thank you so much for that question. I am definitely an advocate for having a bias for action. Of course, once you've had some thoughtful time to research and collaborate, but there has to be time to act and move. And in my opinion, the first thing you need to do in assessing your total workforce strategy before you get to the management, what is your why? How are you using your workforce today? And of course, that even starts with understanding the work that needs to be done, because you need to look at that. Hopefully that has evolved and updated over time. And if it hasn't, that's where you should start, right? Your business strategy is going to dictate the work that needs to be done and how you do it. And it better be technology enabled. Once you rationalize the work, then you can start to look at what is my workforce today and how does it need to change? And in my simple approach right now, I'm saying there are 3 elements to your workforce. And this is not anything new. You've seen it in white papers from the big 3 firms and all of that. You have to consider your employee work portion of your workforce, the non-employer contract labor part of your workforce, and the technology that's almost a workforce by itself, or it should be. And under each of those 3 pillars, you have sub-pillars to consider. So for example, in the employee pillar, you have to think about the current composition of your workforce. What are the skills and roles in your workforce, and how does that need to uplift? What are the demographics of your workforce, both in work experience across a 30-year industrial career and where they're located? You have to look at all of those traditional demographics of your workforce with the added in skills, knowledge, experience, intelligence that's required of today's, skills transformation. Okay. Employee pillar. Non-employee contract labor pillar, you have this whole tapestry of what does contract labor look like, or what's available in the marketplace. If your company has only used staff aug, contingent staffing with some kind of bubble of SOW that you've never really looked at before. Even within SOW, there are subsegments of contract labor. And as regional and global, worker labor laws change, there are new and innovative ways that we can structure workers in our environment to the benefit of our business needs. You have to be willing to look at that entire tapestry and determine for 2026 and onward what makes sense for where your organization is going. And then the third pillar is enabling technology as a workforce. But you can't do that if you haven't first rationalized the work and then rationalize the talent density of both your employee population and your non-employee population, because then you can better deploy the enabling technology, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love the way you break that down. That's really nice and structured. Just to touch on one point there that I think I mentioned this to you earlier. I was at an AI related dinner and discussion in a nice fancy restaurant in London earlier this week. And the discussion was around AI and how it's going to affect work, and the move from work being considered mainly in terms of time to the fact that AI could take someone who's, needs to work 5 days a week to achieve something to actually, it only takes them 3 days a week. So more of a mentality shift around outputs rather than just time. Really interesting. Also, another concept that came out of that was this idea of they were actually the analysts that were running the dinner. They were actually talking about AI workers, a little bit in the like you're saying, technology as a workforce. It's part of the mix of ultimately the objective, which is getting the work done. So I love the way you describe that, and I think that's a very forward-thinking principle. But it's also, it ties into your sort of pragmatism, having that engineering and operational background. It's about getting it done, isn't it? That's the thing.
That is absolutely about getting it done. Getting the work done. And I offer to anyone or any organization that says it's too much, we're too big to do this, to do a total workforce transformation. First, I'll tell you, you don't have a choice. You have to do it to stay competitive. And number two, you're probably thinking about some sort of top-down initiative where a handful of people are directing the entire enterprise to go change. What you have to do is remind people they are already going through this AI revolution in their day-to-day lives, and teach them how to reapply what they're experiencing in the outside world and bringing it into work. So first, you've got to teach your leaders how to look at the work being done in their organizations, and again, stratifying that work in partnership with their employees through a conversation of, here's the skills and tasks we're going to uplift and change. How can we AI enable it as we go? When you teach the entire organization to do that, and then you put some infrastructure and governance in place to monitor its evolution, then an enterprise-wide transformation becomes tangible and real and possible. But you got to think about it in the right way. You've got to set it up in the right way. And you've got to remind the people who this is about to impact, they are coming along for the journey. They have to help craft a lot of the ground floor changes, and trust that leadership is going to keep the right guardrails in place for all of us to stay safe and productive, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I like the way you're framing this in terms of setting it up for success. And I think what you were talking about before, when we were talking about taking on the giant kind of like contract labor, SOW, and contingent program at Gen 1 as something you've got to solve, I likened it to being quite like an entrepreneurial startup almost, like that attitude. And what you're saying, and I love this, clearly you do genuinely have a bias for taking action, which is brilliant. I love that. But that also is quite entrepreneurial. And also I think the what is your why, and understanding at a fundamental level, what's the business strategy and what does that mean we've got to do, and okay, how are we going to do it most effectively? this is very much, it's amazing to see a very large enterprise thinking in the way that a scale up organization, a fast growth tech company, that's how they have to think. And I think that's really interesting to see that approach being applied to it. But absolutely, and the onus is on the business to communicate the strategy effectively, and then for this type of initiative to take that strategy and then apply it to the different ways that the organization can get work done. I love that, and that's a great. It's kind of, some people might think that seems obvious, but a lot of people miss that.
They do, and the critical point is really taking those beautiful words and turning them into action. Literally at the lower levels of the organization, forgive me, I don't have a better word for that, where the work actually happens. Leaders working with their employees to say, let's take a look at your job. Let's take a look at the task you're executing. One, are those tasks going to stay or are they going to change? Two, do you have the right skills to execute the current and new tasks going forward? And if you don't, three, let's figure out how to get you upskilled and technology enabled at the same time. But leaders have to have very good understandings of their own organizations to be able to do that. So now we're having a different conversation about when the highest levels of leadership in an organization look across their leader levels, do they have the right people with the right skills and experience that both technically understand the organization, but also culturally, intuitively understand their organization to be able to drive this kind of tangible evolution? It is very real.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, one of the things that kind of triggers a thought in my head is, how on earth, one of the biggest problems surely for some companies is like, how do they find somebody like you to do this type of stuff? Because sometimes, and I feel like this is where sometimes organizations are not empowering people properly, where you might have somebody who's, you know, got all the right attributes, who's sat in procurement, for example, but maybe they don't have a good enough understanding of the rest of the business. I mean, this is definitely where like you can get like a kind of like elite, you know, SEAL Team 6 unit of, you know, special forces unit that are basically brought together cross-functional, but it's having that strategic understanding and being able to apply it. I do think there are lots of really smart people in procurement functions, and I think procurement's a good center point because of the access they have to the business, and really they should center on having a really good understanding of the overarching business strategy. And but so people who are working on the services side of procurement anyway, but also crossing over into people in HR, talent acquisition, contingent workforce, contingent labor, that sort of stuff. But I do think that idea of the right people, the right team to take responsibility for this, that's a critical thing as well. And it's interesting to see how Dow did that in terms of obviously coming up with the initiative from an exec point of view and saying, right, now we need to find the right people who can execute this.
That's right. And we were a fully dedicated team. I make sure I say that in all these podcasts, because any executive leadership team that thinks they're going to have a transformational team of any resort that's not fully dedicated is kidding themselves. So we were fully dedicated for almost 3 years, 100%. All we did was contract labor strategy. And we absolutely were like a SEAL 16. I mean, because the people assembled for this team represented the best of the functions we represented. And it truly was an honor for me to lead the team. There was a lot of trust invested in me to do that, but I also had a lot of credibility in the organization, warranting that I deserved that opportunity, right? But it was when you're doing these things, you have got to have the right people in leadership, both administratively and influentially, to drive the kind of change at all levels that needs to happen. It's very important. And as for me, I have always been an advocate for myself in my organization, because I've always wanted to be the biggest contributor to Dow I could be. And that can't happen if people don't know what I can do. So while I'm doing the good work, I also make it visible. I am vocal. And, some people could even call it opportunistic. My driver has always wanted to be the biggest, most contributing of myself I could be for Dow in whatever space I was in, while I also gain the maximum employee experience I could at the same time. That's the other part of my role that I don't get to talk about as much, but I'm sure that will change in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, and I look at that and I think to myself, well, I'm pretty sure the executive board at Dow would love it. The more people that do that, the better, because
It is.
you're saying, how can I be as useful as possible to my organization? That's the dream, really, for an organization. Some organizations seem to have a culture and they want to put people in a box. I can't abide that. I always think, if you're hiring somebody, why would you restrict them? If you're paying for somebody to do work for your business, give them the opportunity to give you the best value they possibly can. So I think I wholeheartedly agree with that approach, and that's something I certainly support in our organization. If people are saying, hey, I want to take on a challenge, or hey, look at this great stuff I've done, I'm all for it, because if it's done in the spirit of trying to contribute as effectively as possible, that should be applauded, in my opinion.
Yeah. And Johnny, we're still talking about services procurement, because this is a big black hole space that people have avoided. So I'm sure in your role, as you're trying to connect with companies and make them understand your solution capabilities and why, you're looking for people in your potential customers like me that are courageous and capable to take on these big problems, right? So we're still talking services procurement, because that solutioning never happens if you don't get the right people in place.
It's brilliant. You've actually kind of clued into something there, which is it's kind of an internal thing that we have, where we talk about the enlightened ones and we talk about the change makers. And that's exactly the people that us, as a services procurement system, a technology purely dedicated to solving this problem around this area of spend, we're not talking to everybody in the room. We're talking to the people that are not happy with things being done badly. We're talking about to the people that are willing to, put their head above the parapet and take on a challenge. And the rewards are there for people that can do that in this massively greenfield area, where suddenly these solutions are coming out, the technology is enabling it, the world is changing, and the why of why organizations have to do it, and the fact that there's no excuse organizations have to do this. There's some real opportunities for people to make a mark here, and to almost it's almost like a new type of role I feel will start to emerge that encompasses this sort of stuff.
I have a point around that later, but we can we'll get there.
Excellent. Well, just coming back to the 3 pillars. So looking at total workforce management, the way you broke that down, I love the way you described that and kind of the architecture of how that operates. So ultimately, with the channels that you're operating through, employees, non-employees, so contract labor of any type, SOW, contractors and temps, etc., and technology as a workforce, those 3 pillars, the organization really has to have each of those pillars pretty well buttoned down before they can then start to architect that into some sort of overall meaningful strategy. And even before that, they've got to understand what the business strategy is and what that means in terms of work being done. When you were going through this process, I mean, from what you were saying earlier, I think it's pretty obvious that it was the middle category, the contract labor, SOW, contingent workforce category. It sounds like that was the biggest gap. I guess the technology one is always evolving, but would you? I feel like that's probably the biggest gap for many organizations with regards to when they look at their how they do work. It's such a big area and it's so badly managed.
It is. So now you're allowing me to make this point. Statement of work. First of all, organizations need to realize they've been doing services procurement and statement of work for decades. Okay. Anytime you bring in a consultant, as an example, to do anything, that is a form of services procurement statement of work. What we haven't done is manage that space effectively because we don't have the right skill and talent in mass in the company enough to manage statement of work or services procurement engagements. I am seeing statement of work is being one of the new ways of work companies have to get work done because of shifts in the labor market, shifts in worker psychology and sentiment. People are getting more and more expensive through traditional employment means. Organizations have to be more competitive about when and where they bring in skill, expertise, and capability, and how they're going to pay for it. The nature of work itself, if we allow it to be technologically enabled properly, the nature of work can be more segmented and packageable, less consistent and continuous in the organization. Now, the organization itself, the corporate infrastructures, the work processes, those will remain to be connected and continuous. Absolutely, they have to be. But along the way, along the processes we are executing in the enterprise, we will be able to better see through technology the places where we can package and compartmentalize work. So we can make better decisions about when it's a good option to outsource that work. And as long as you start to build skills and expertise in your organization, in your direct employee organization, on how to better manage that SOW, you reduce the fear and anxiety across the organization about the concept of SOW being a key enabler. That is what I more than believe. It is what I am seeing as key for my own organization and a lot of other companies that I talk to when I go to these conferences and do these things. This is it. This is the moment. This is what we need to realize right now and figure out. While AI is changing roles in our organization, there are new roles that need to either be expanded or developed. In Dow, we have some really sharp people that manage contracts, not only in procurement, but in other places in the organization. A lot of those people are late career and are starting to retire. But we still need that expertise if we're going to fully capitalize on the services procurement opportunity in front of us. So I'm clearly very excited about it. And I'm excited about employees who can build this new skill or suite of skills for this need that we have and we will have even more so in the future right now. It's not just Dow, it's every company out there.
Yeah, I like that. It's really interesting. It's sort of, it ties into what you were saying earlier about the emphasis on skills and capabilities. You know, what can we do? What capacity have we got? What capability have we got within the organization and in that kind of extended organizational capacity? And your point about people who are maybe exiting the business from a retirement point of view. I mean, the skill shortages in STEM, for example, engineering, it's absolutely massive. And we're seeing this is quite interesting when we see with some of the kind of large like engineering, aerospace, defense industry organizations we work with, where a lot of the time they're thinking about like horizon planning. They're looking down the road at the capabilities because technology is changing so fast. The markets are changing so fast, faster than ever before. Like you say, you've got to be thinking ahead. You can't just be thinking about what do we do right now? What does that look like in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years? And that's changing all the time. And so obviously keeping up with that from a talent strategy point of view in terms of your internal talent, extremely important, but being able to leverage your supply chain and by making services procurement a well-managed part of your organization, it builds those supplier relationships where you can be engaging with your supply chain to say, well, do you know what? We've got this sort of thing coming down the road. Who can do this? Which suppliers have got these particular capabilities that we're not aware of? And actually look at the gaps where you need to build that supply chain, bring in new types of suppliers, and enable that kind of innovation. I think it's so critical because it comes back to that whole thing of what's the most effective way for us to do the work that we need to do now and in the future. So it's
sure.
if people have a complete mess in services procurement, which I see all the time, it's just a black hole. It's on spreadsheets, it's on Word documents, it's on emails, it's on Teams, it's on phone calls. The supply chain's not shared effectively. There's no rigor around contracts and compliance. There's no ability for organizations to see which suppliers are doing which projects really in any detail and whether they're even doing a good job of it. So it kind of, I think for an organization to be able to get to the point where they can genuinely look at the total optimization of their workforce, their organizational capacity and capability, if they haven't got services procurement nailed, they can't even really they can't even get started on it. And that's partly, I think, where in previous times the total workforce management conversation has maybe fallen short a little bit.
That's right. That's right. Because the non-employee contract labor segment of it, such a big part of that is services procurement. And that's the black hole of all the disconnected processes and pieces of information and people in teams managing things in many, many, many different ways. And there's not the right, the corporation itself, the enterprise does not have the right infrastructure to at least initially apply enough command and control over that space to stabilize it and then rebuild it. And let's just be clear, okay? And some of your listeners may not certainly agree with this. We are in a time where there is so much uncertainty and volatility, and good companies have tried to lean into empowering their employee bases, but the mere mortal employees need some direction. They need some direction. So in order for an enterprise to look at their services procurement cloud and say it's a mess, someone somewhere has to take ownership and control of it, even for a short period of time, and say, we are going to assess all of the assets in this cloud. We are going to discern what parts of it we're going to keep, what parts of it we're going to change and transform, and what parts we're going to throw away. And we are going to make that decision quickly. And then we are going to be about the business of rebuilding for now and the future, because we don't need to keep all of the assets that are in that cloud. The last time we looked, well, we've never looked at them holistically. And we are going to find a lot of it is out of date. A lot of it is broken. And I mean contracts, data we're capturing, tools we're using, processes we're using, all of that is part of the assets, right? It needs to be assessed. It needs to be quickly cleaned. It needs to have some governance and ownership and structure for a time period until a new system is put in place where it can start to thrive. But we need a little bit of command and control in some places. And I think some organizations are just hesitating to take that step for whatever reason. If it goes against culture, stakeholder sentiment, maybe the board is not on your side. I don't know what it is, but the longer it takes for you to make a decision, the more you're losing money and marketplace share, and the less viable you're becoming. Okay, I said it. I'm sorry.
I totally agree with you. I just think that companies that do take that attitude, they're going to be in for a shock, and maybe by the time they realize it, it's going to be too late, and they're just going to get outstripped by their competitors. With this stuff, it is complicated. It is hard work, but it's not trying to fly to Mars. It's a solvable problem. It requires organization, and it requires courage and leadership and the action, positive, immediate, and effective action to actually to make things happen. But I think the point you made there is one of the biggest problems, as I see it, is the lack of ownership. And I think when you look at services procurement, because the procurement of services goes across multiple categories in procurement. There's plenty of services categories. Your consulting category, legal, marketing, facilities management, whatever it might be, engineering services, IT services. Organizations are thinking about categories, and they've got category managers, but the way that that kind of like builds up to a peak, I sometimes feel like there's not that level of emphasis on. It's like the whole direct versus indirect breakdown in procurement. I feel like that's still very valid, but in some ways, I feel like that's a bit moving a bit into legacy territory, because I look at it now and I just think, how are the organizations contracting for the things that they buy? The way that they buy stuff, goods and materials, has a certain type of contract, whether it's a bill of materials or however that works. And the process, the contract and the process around that works in a certain way. The way that the organization buys people
and services, yep,
it has a contract that works in a certain way. And the way that organizations buy services, i.e. under a statement of work or a task order or a work order, that's very specific. And that's the thing that most organizations haven't solved. But it doesn't seem to sit under any particular ownership. And sometimes it'll have gray areas that kind of fall under talent acquisition and HR, where they're worried about misclassification, and they'll edge into some of the kind of SOW consultancy. And then you've got the pure procurement category managers that are maybe dealing with an IT services category, which are huge and very critical spend. How do you think, or what's the process that you think that organizations, the thought process they could go through to look at who could or should take ownership? And I don't know, maybe it's not necessarily the same answer to the question for every company.
True. I appreciate the fact that you are advocating for thinking about this flow of work or materials or cost differently. I've seen, and as I've always practiced, you have to look at your ecosystem. You must look at your ecosystem and how the work is changing in that ecosystem. And maybe the traditional functions that we've put in place, or maybe the traditional work processes we put in place no longer fit the flow of work, the flow of cost, the flow of profitability, and who truly owns the levers across a value stream. And you can have a lot of value streams in a company. You can have a product value stream. You can have an IP value stream. You have talent value streams. How is the knowledge capital flowing through the work that needs to happen across the entities you've established in the company that have all changed in the last 10 years, 5 years, 2 years? And how are you going to rationalize that down to the most granular element, whether it's work, tasks, costs, whatever works for your organization, and then rewire your organization built on maximizing the knowledge capital required to do the work to meet your business objectives? Kind of a big answer, but the point in all of that is the wiring in your organization has changed, and you probably don't even know it. But you're wondering, why is it so difficult to get even the smallest things done? It's because the nature of business and all the levers that push and pull on business have changed around you, but all of your processes and steps have not. And so now you need to rewire for the world around you.
That's a very good way to put it, because it's adapting to the way that the world has changed, and the pace of change and the growth in, for example, the reliance on external service providers, the reliance on, or the growth in output or outcome driven work, the skills shortages, the fact that we're moving towards a more service driven world, more service driven economy. All of these things have meant that the problem around managing services procurement might, for some organizations, feel like it's come out of nowhere and is suddenly this monster, but actually it's been growing rapidly in the background, but from multiple different angles, it's accelerated, which is where some organizations now find themselves in a real muddle with it. And, as you say, have no clear structure that's looking after it, because the way their business is wired is the correct wiring for how that business needed to operate 5 or 10 years ago. So yeah, I think that's a really great way to put it. And it is a difficult problem for organizations to solve, but once they get into the mentality of trying to solve it, either the route that Dow went down of saying, okay, we need a specialist team, cross-functional team to come and be dedicated to this and address it. Or there might be people putting their hands up saying, look, there's a problem here. I think I can drive massive value from it, and I want to take on the challenge. There are going to be opportunities for those. Like I say, the people that we want to talk to, we always talk about the enlightened ones or the illuminated princes and princesses that get the problem and want to do something about it.
Right.
And they're the people that will take on the challenge, make the change, get the results, get the kudos, and inspire other people to say, this is something that can be done, which I think is one of the critical aspects of it.
Yes.
So looking at services procurement moving forward, I find it really interesting how you talk about some of the changes that are happening in the market, that are happening in the world, that are fundamentally increasing the importance of services procurement. Could you give me a little bit of your thought process around how that kind of work has changed? So, or what's changing that in terms of the demand around the lack of young people coming in with STEM skills, this kind of issue around early career engagement, and also the fact that people already kind of do that now. But then there's the late career side of it, which you kind of touched on earlier. But what other factors do you think are driving this kind of growth in importance of the services procurement outsourced nature?
Of service, yes. So first, in the talent strategy, we build for M&E operations in Dow. We look at the talent value stream, as you were alluding to, and we look at early, mid, and late career. And we are asking ourselves right now, what kind of experience do employee experience? What kind of experience do early career workers want to have, mid-career workers, and late career workers? And there are personas as humans move through their natural progression of life. They want a different experience in working. And I'm not only talking about employees, I'm primarily talking about employees, but as we're talking about the rationalization of work, I'm thinking about all the workers that engage with us, okay? No matter what, services procurement and understanding what it is and how a company uses it will be a new skill development in every phase of career worker. Because likely in every phase of career, you will be dealing with a worker or a project that is services procurement styled. So you've got to understand, why is the organization structured the way it is? Why are we using services procurement? If I'm an early career engineer and we have a special improvement project going, why are we buying this maintenance consulting firm's ideas or perspectives, right? If I'm an engineer, I'm here, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Oh, but it's something really, really technical that I don't have experience in it and nobody else in our company does. So we've got to go buy that service. But I'm the engineer being assigned to work on that project. I need to understand. If I'm mid-career and I'm a plant leader who's recognizing we have a technical issue going on in our plant and we need to go buy some expertise, as part of my job and my skill, I need to have the language to be able to, one, understand that's possible, right? That's part of our workforce and talent and skill and business strategy to activate services procurement as a lever. And then I need to know what I'm looking for. So when I'm working with the procurement organization to identify the right maintenance company to go buy a short project services from, we can do that more intelligently. And then when I'm late career and I decide maybe I'm ready for retirement, but I still want to work in this industry, I have tremendous bodies of knowledge in my head that I can now package either with myself or with other firms. And now I have industry experience, chemical manufacturing industry language that I can take and come back and offer services procurement in the right ways, in the right places. It's everywhere. And if you realize that now, even while you're still working and you're learning about how services procurement is going to enable business strategy in so many ways going forward, you get to become a smarter adopter and practitioner, and maybe even in the future, provider.
Yeah, yeah, that's brilliant. That's a great way to encapsulate that. And if I'm sure people listening to this will be sitting up and pricking their ears up and saying that this is really emphasizing the importance. This is critical, and hopefully that will really inspire some people to take action. So just to kind of bring this all together, we talked about the different channels, and ultimately, when you're looking at the total workforce management, total workforce optimization, it's then the question of orchestrating all of that together. So once you've nailed these channels, we know services procurement is the biggest gap for most organizations, and it's a giant gap, and that needs to be closed. And that's, people are starting to do that, which is fantastic. But when we look at total workforce management, I described it to you at one point as kind of, it feels like it's a topic that's been around, but it feels like actually doing it is almost like a bit of a new skill. What would be your advice to the organizations that are on this journey, where the leaders that are making this happen, where maybe they've now got their channels getting them pretty well organized?
Yes.
What do you think the conversation within those businesses needs to focus on in terms of what they do when it comes to then trying to bring that up into total workforce management?
Yes. One thing that comes to mind is as you are making sense of your employee, contract labor, and technology pillars, and you are starting to rationalize the work and how it's getting done, you need to also ask yourself, what is the most effective way to get this work done? Meaning, should it be done by employees? Can it be done equally or better by non-employees? And how much of it should I absolutely be enabling through the technology? But you have to, as soon as you get your pillars set and you're reasonably comfortable with some structure around managing them, you've got to start doing the work rationalization in that way, because work is going to start to move from one pillar to another, or work is going to exit completely. And then you have to imagine the new work, thereby informing the new skills that need to come in. And yes, you have to do this all at once, because it is absolutely a balancing act. In my engineering mind, it is an equation. A plus B equals C plus D. And all four of them are going to move a little bit at the same time. And you have to become comfortable with that constant balancing and flow. So this means you better incorporate some pretty good fundamental guiding principles and infrastructure and technology enablement that allows you to manage that equation. There's no other way to do it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think, you've spoken to me before about the people that are looking at this, kind of getting the right perspective on it and looking at really how they can put tangible actions in place. How can they move it forward? I think, you've emphasized how critical that is, and I completely agree with you. And one of the other areas that would be interesting to kind of round this off and get your view on is just how much store do you place in the importance of kind of like internal education, within organizations? In the sense that, sometimes the organization, there might be like a top level strategy that's driving this, where the board are really enlightened and or the CPO or the CFO or whoever it is, operations people are driving this. But what about, so there's that type of internal education, but there's also potentially the type of internal education where you get some real change maker who wants to take action, who's kind of jumping up and down saying, this is a problem, we've got to solve this, we've got to do this. How do you think those two methods of education can be used within organizations to actually make this happen?
make this happen. Uh, Early in my career, I read a couple of books by Stephen Covey, which people clearly still reference today. And one of his principles was begin with the end in mind.
Right.
And as a ProSci certified change practitioner myself, I believe that when you begin with the end in mind, what is the ultimate desired outcome? You have to look at that outcome at all levels of the organization. And then you have to get very good at crafting a realistic, credible path to that desired end result. And in doing that, you will discover the language, the words, the storytelling that is important for both the C-suite and the shop floor. And when you start to tell that story, if you've crafted it and delivered it in the right way, you will catch all the advocates at all levels. And then you can learn how to activate them. But education is not presentations and town halls, and it's some of that. But the real magic happens when you've really connected with the stakeholder audience, whatever, from the C-suite to the shop floor. There are dozens or hundreds of them in between. When you find a way to meaningfully connect with them with a what's in it for me, for them perspective, and you learn how to craft that story and make it real to them and show them how they can show up in the story, and we're all marching toward this desired end result, the advocates come out in all of their best selves, ready to employ and activate all the skills and experience they have toward the common good. I've seen it.
That's where the magic happens, right? It's where you've motivated all of the people in the chain. And I always make this analogy of kind of like, you're rowing the Atlantic. Everybody in that boat matters. Everybody's got to be able to contribute, need to know where they're going, and they need to know why they're trying to do it. And then everybody can really
they must understand. They must know. They must see themselves in it. They must. Otherwise, they are disconnected. They are confused. They may even be apathetic, which is very dangerous in an organization that is about to transform. And let's be clear, we are all about to transform going into 2026, whether we know it or not. So yes, very important.
Excellent. So just to kind of wrap things up, how do you think practitioners can kind of come together on this? I know there's some interesting stuff that we've spoken about before, where you've been kind of thinking about how people can engage in more conversation, more dialogue, more knowledge sharing. Like you say, it's not necessarily like company IP here. We're just people, it's best practice. It's taking everybody forward. But what do you see as the ways in which practitioners, whether it be procurement people, supply chain, contingent labor specialists, operations people, but the people that are trying to solve these problems, how do you think they can come together as practitioners?
Yes, I mentioned earlier in this episode, back in 2022, as soon as I figured out there was not a solution for total contract labor strategy available in the marketplace, I started going to the conferences and asking to be put on panels and asking for them to start talking about putting into their agendas, not only contract labor strategy, but that quickly evolved into total workforce strategy, because I was trying to find and uncover the people and organizations talking about this, and more importantly, trying to solve for this literally over the last 3 years. And I make this very visible in my LinkedIn narrative and conversation. So I continue to get invited to opportunities like this with you, Johnny, and Zivio and others, because we need to identify the pillars of our industries and make sure total workforce strategy becomes a priority. And when I think about chemical manufacturing, one that pops at the top of my mind is the Manufacturing Institute. And Dow has had a decades-long relationship with Manufacturing Institute and the National Association of Manufacturing. And I was very fortunate to be in a space this year where I met one of the executive directors. And I happened to be giving a presentation about this stuff. And that was I never would have met this person otherwise. And it started a wonderful conversation and a deeper connection between Dow and NAM and MI, where now maybe we can start to evolve this topic as a part of an industry pillar that needs to be further developed. And I continue to go to the conferences. I'm always willing to do this with you, but we must create some industry foundational, we must find those industry foundational communities and make total workforce strategy and total workforce management with all the elements we talked about today, service procurement included, part of the agenda, the narrative, and the priorities. It can't just happen at the conferences. It can't happen in the collectives and the great, thought leadership sessions and small groups and coffee groups we established. Those are great, but the time now is for us to get embedded into the industries. For me, it's manufacturing and chemical manufacturing. There's healthcare, there's wherever, but it has to become part of the agenda, the narrative, and the priorities. And I'm here for it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that approach. And it's like, I sometimes find with the conferences that maybe they're a little bit behind with some of this stuff where it's really like cutting edge. And I also find that the format sometimes just doesn't give people enough time.
It does. Yeah.
Round tables, you're rushing into a round table, you're rushing out of a round table, there's 12 people on the table, you've got a 20-minute session. People can't even introduce themselves properly in that sort of time. You need the time to have this sort of dialogue. And the beautiful thing about it is there isn't any reason for people to be protective about this stuff. It's stuff that can be shared, and it's beneficial to within the practitioner community, isn't it?
And ultimately, we are all here for business success. The world is truly big enough for all of us to be here. Now, granted, some are going to be better than others, but this change is not happening to one company. Our industries are connected because now many of us are dipping into the same talent pools for workers. Our industries are connected. So the better we get at solving for these talent systems and finding the right talent to come and do the work, even as humans evolve through their own talent, career experiences, talent value stream, you name it, whatever. We all have to grow and evolve in these ways just to keep our industries going, in my very informed opinion. So yes, this best practice needs to be proliferated as widely as possible. And again, I am so thankful for your invitation to participate today, because it's just another opportunity, another placement in the cog of the machine that we're trying to influence. But I think this is a pretty big cog today. Okay, that's my mechanical engineer coming out.
Yeah, I love it. No, listen, I appreciate you so much. I really appreciate the fact you're getting this message out there. You're willing to take the time, help other people, talk about your experiences and the journey. And I do think it's super, super valuable for people. And I think, you're setting a great example to what other people who are in their own journeys can do to share their experiences and help bring everybody forward. And make this, as it should be, a really exciting topic and something that really makes a massive difference. So I'm hugely grateful for you to give up your time and come and talk to me. Just massively appreciate it. Thank you so much.
For sure, Johnny. Thank you.